So I'm like any other Brit. But here's the big but. I actually think it's deeply unhelpful to the United Kingdom to constantly kind of hanker after. We just talked earlier about the dangers, and Alain was talking earlier about the dangers of perfection in relationships between two individuals. I think there's a certain sort of sepia-tinted nostalgia and idealism about the special relationship, which just kind of ignores the fact that there are big differences, and we are several thousand miles away from each other. And for Brits, particularly now when we're kind of halfway out the door, as far as our relationship with Europe is concerned, it worries me. We are, whether we like it or not, tectonically, geographically, geologically, a European nation. We're not halfway across the Atlantic. We're not a state of the United States. We are a European nation. Always have been, always will be. And my worry is that by talking up the special relationship, we kind of ignore the fact that we are as much, if not more, European than we are American. And particularly, and you might want to talk about it, particularly when it comes to trade, the biggest single determinant that drives why nations trade with each other remains geography, distance. For every mile that you increase in distance between two nations, you generally halve the amount of trade they do with each other. So my worry is we're now going to sort of pursue this dream of somehow rebuilding very, very close economic relationships we have with our very close geographical neighbours, with economies which are big and powerful like America, but it's just far away. And I just don't think that's kind of work for us Brits.
Because I guess I get why we would want to have a special relationship with America, because America is big and powerful and rich and has got huge consumption power if we're talking about trade. But Americans, do you want a special relationship with us? Why wouldn't you want that with France? They've got better food, or Germany with all their great cars. What makes our relationship special to you? Is it our royals, our music, our fashion, our shared values? Call me toll free on 877-974-7487. Tweet me on SXM Insight, or share your thoughts on Facebook Live at facebook.com/Noreena Hertz. So I want to come to trade because I'm really interested in this. You see, back in January, I met with somebody called Anthony Scaramucci. Now, I don't know if you remember. Okay. All right. Stacey's already laughing.
Shaking my head.
Stacey's already laughing. But basically, Anthony Scaramucci.
What do they call him? The Mooch?
The Mooch.
Yeah.
He's a real character. He's very charismatic, a real character. But I met him before his very short-lived role as communications director of the White House. I met him in his previous role when he was supposed to be Trump's kind of trade envoy, supposed to be talking up trade. So this was in January. So it was before, I guess, even the inauguration, or just around the inauguration. And what he said to me was that Donald Trump really wanted to do a trade deal with the United States, and that actually we were with the United Kingdom, and actually we were first in line for the trade deal. Is that even before you were Deputy Prime Minister, before you led the Liberal Democrat Party, you were a trade negotiator, so you know this stuff. Does it make sense that America would prioritize a trading relationship with little old us?
Well, it makes sense as a sort of throwaway line in a conversation with the Mooch, but it makes it's all complete baloney compared to the reality. The reality is much more hard-bitten. The trade negotiations, and you're quite right, many years ago, before I went into politics, I worked as a European trade negotiator. And I remember sitting in really aggressive meetings between American trade negotiators and European trade negotiators, where Americans said, why don't you accept our genetically modified crops? Well, why don't you take our beef, which has got hormones in it? Why don't you accept I remember Joe Biden actually saying to me when we were talking about a transatlantic European American trade deal, and I remember him saying to me in that kind of folksy grandfatherly way of his, he said to me, Nick, we will not sign up in Washington to a trade deal with Europe if the chicken farmers of Delaware don't like it. And he was right. He was right in the sense that everybody's got to look after their own interests. You've got to look after your own communities. Congress people have got to look after their own districts. And it doesn't matter what the Mooch says. Frankly, it doesn't even matter what Trump says. At the end of the day, you've got to get this stuff through Congress, and it doesn't matter how much they like the royal family, how much they like watching BBC dramas, how much they like the British accent, how much they like Yorkshire tea. It doesn't matter. All of that sentimental stuff Doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it'll be a very hard-headed calculation about whether they're prepared to kind of open up their markets to us. And of course, the other thing us Brits have got to remember is we're very, very small compared to America. And generally in trade negotiations, if there's one big gorilla on one side of the table and a little mouse on the other, it's the gorilla tends to. I'm mixing my gorilla and mouse metaphors. You know what I mean?
We know.
Size matters. Let me put it that way. Let me say back. Size matters.
And you know the numbers better than I do, but I think it's 0.5% of the U.S. activity is UK based, right? I mean, it's a very small percent.
There's a lot of investment.
Yes.
So there's a lot of investment between the two. But in terms of, you're quite right. In terms of, just on the point I said earlier about geography, there is a reason why we trade. United
Mainly
Kingdom,
with Europe.
with Little Island, which is a tiny economy, more than we do with China and India, two of the great economic superpowers of the future, combined.
I love that fact.
It's an extraordinary
I love
statistic.
that fact.
Extraordinary.
We trade more with
But guess what the reason is? Because
India.
it's very nearby. There's a reason why Mexico and Canada will always trade more with the United States than we will.
Well, not if Trump.
Do you know, even if he
destroys it
sticks
with
up that
NAFTA.
wall, even if he sticks up that wall and says it, still geography will try.
But Nick, can I ask, is it
does.
because transport costs are high, or is it something else? Is it that people don't like getting on airplanes for long flights? Is it a cultural thing? Why is geography so key?
That's a very good question, because transport costs have come down, but quite a lot of what we consume these days is consumed in the time between manufacture and consumption gets shorter and shorter and shorter. Look at clothes, for example. I mean, it's why, by the way, we're repatriating in Europe and the United Kingdom the production of clothes, because it used to be fine to have a jersey made in Bangladesh and then several weeks later. Now we're consuming this stuff in this kind of throwaway society at great velocity. So distance is oddly enough becoming in many respects more important all over again. If you speak to the car industry in the United Kingdom, we now produce more cars here than we ever have done in our history. It's because of investment from American car companies, Japanese car companies. They do it because they like to produce cars here and ship them very quickly to markets in Germany and France and elsewhere. You can never reproduce that when you've got the vast Atlantic between. You can't. In other words, these marginal differences make all the difference.
Can we talk about a story that's really headline here in the UK, a potential reason why we're never going to do a trade deal with the US? And it's the story of the fact that you guys eat chlorinated chicken and we guys don't want to eat chlorinated chicken. Is that right? Yeah. Basically. So I think the story is, if I understand it correctly, that in America you wash your raw chicken, Stacey, not you personally perhaps, with chlorine. And here and in Europe, we don't think that's a good thing. And so this is potentially a really big stumbling block. Were you aware that you washed your chicken with chlorine, Stacey?
I wasn't aware of that, but I will tell you, moving here to London, it's been fascinating seeing how few ingredients go into most produce, particularly not just raw produce, but produce that's been manufactured, if you will, compared to the US. I mean, you'll typically have a list of 15 or 20 different items on
what sort of product?
Biscuits, for example, crackers, which is what we call them in the US, right? In here, you'll see a much smaller number of items on the list than you would typically.
And is that the European Union? Is that the European Union?
No, I mean, I personally think, well, I don't know the answer completely, but I do think it's important to remember, Stacey alludes to, that you have industrial scale farming. You have a sort of industrialization of agriculture in the United States, which is on a scale and is conducted with a kind of efficiency and with a concoction of the use of chemicals and other processes, which, I mean, you can argue whether it's scientific or not. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But in Europe, it's just not culturally acceptable. And now that's perhaps more true so if you go to countries like, my wife is Spanish. My wife comes from a tiny little agricultural village in the middle of Spain. Her aunts and uncles were all involved in the sugar beet farming community in central Spain. It's not untypical in particularly southern Europe and in France that everybody can trace their family just one or two generations back to the land. In other words, there's a connection to the land, a personal connection, which is just a lot stronger than it is in a country where the industrialization of huge tracts of agricultural land just because it's a younger, newer kind of industry, it's quite different. So I just think you're just dealing with history. We can't escape our own history and culture. And the reality is that this cluttered little continent of ours, Europe, just has a different history, certainly when it comes to farming.
I would agree, but I think there's actually a move back towards, and you look at Amazon's purchase of Whole Foods as a fantastic example, right? I think maybe, even in the US, you're seeing, we might.
Now, just one question before we kind of wrap up this section, which I'm really enjoying and wish could go on forever, but it can't. I want to ask you, Nick, one thing. We've been talking about the US-British special relationship, and you've been saying let's not have it so romanticized. Actually, there are differences, and we in Britain should also be recognizing that we're European. Get that. But in terms of our relationship with America, now we've got an American president, Donald Trump, a mercurial, increasingly unstable man. Do we want a special relationship with this man?
Well, I wouldn't, but I hope in a weird kind of way that Trump is actually doing us a service here in the UK, in the same way that I would urge kind of the American listeners to this program not to kind of over-romanticize the UK is not all costume dramas and happy fairy tale royal weddings. We need to kind of snap out of this idea that somehow we still live in the era of Churchill and Roosevelt. We don't. And I just kind of think in a weird kind of way, the fact that Trump is so mercurial, so frankly downright rude and offensive sometimes, as he was to our prime minister in the last few days, maybe that'll just shake some people out of this. I think we should be really, really positive about the links we have with each other. Language, history, humor, culture, but not allow that. I mean, Alain's earlier allusion is so important, but not allow that to become a kind of state of perfection which we can never reach. Well, it'll be much more healthy for this relationship if we're realistic about what divides us as much as we are celebratory about what unites us.
Beautifully put. Well, thank you so much, Nick, for your insights and honesty. Your book, How to Stop Brexit and Make Britain Great Again, is now out. For anyone wanting to get their heads around British politics, I strongly recommend it. It's a great read. If you've just joined us, welcome. You're listening to MegaHertz London Calling, live from London. With me, Noreena Hertz, are my guests, Nick Clegg, Alain de Botton and Stacey Boyd. We're asking you to phone in, join us on social media to let us know what you think is special about us Brits and what you think about our prince marrying your gal. So call me toll free on 877-974-7487, tweet me on SXM Insight, or share your thoughts on Facebook Live at facebook.com/Noreena Hertz. Stacey, you're a very impressive entrepreneur. You've founded incredible businesses in the United States that aren't also commercial success stories, but are also helping society in a really meaningful way. And I'm really looking forward to learning all about your new venture, Olivela. But first, as an American who's just moved here, what advice do you have for Meghan Markle? In fact, for anyone thinking of moving over here, what are you finding most different or difficult about living here?
I had the most fascinating juxtaposition. I'm a runner, so I love to run in the morning. I was in New York last week, and I was staying at about 28th and 5th Avenue, and I ended up running to the Met. It's 3 miles from 28th Street on up to the Met, which is on uptown. And I did the same run today to the National Gallery, which is about 3.5 miles. And the geographic map that I followed in New York compared to the geographic map that I followed in London, to me is analogous of what feels very different between the two. It was a straight line to the Met on my run on Friday. And it was unbelievably circuitous, no less than 19 turns to get to the National Gallery from my neighborhood to get to London. And that feels to me very emblematic of the difference between the two. The US is just this remarkably straightforward country. Everybody says what they think. You know exactly what they feel at the moment they're feeling it. There's very little shield between the two. And the UK feels much more circuitous in all sorts of different ways.
So do you feel I mean, have you had instances where you feel a Brit has said something and
I love it. I mean, there's something that's wonderful because it's much softer and more lovely and easier to get through your day. It's
you know, when someone says you must come for lunch, that means I never want to see you again.
Of course it does, right?
So
I've heard.
We must get together again.
Never
will ever happen. Yes, we were warned before we came.
But isn't that incredibly interesting? Irritating, Stacey, if people are not saying exactly what they think?
It is and it isn't. It's a much easier way to get through the day, right?
What, you just think everyone to behave as if they're polite?
So the other really interesting moment for me is, and I don't know whether this is true. I'm all but a couple of months into my experience here. And Brexit and the vote.
You've got fresh eyes. We like this.
Brexit and the vote would probably indicate otherwise, but it feels to me in my interactions with everybody, whether it's a cab driver or a business person or everything in between, that everyone is all right with their station in life here. And as a result, there's this sort of loveliness that everybody has. And in the US, you have, I feel like everybody is still striving in this very intense way. So you can have a taxi driver who is really wishing he wasn't a taxi driver, and because we're the land of opportunity and we're the land of dreamers and the American dream, for some still believe it's alive, there's a hope and an aspiration and sometimes an anger and an energy that you end up encountering that I, at least so far, haven't found here in the UK, and it might be buried under much more, and I'm hoping you can elaborate on it.
We will try and come back to that after the break, but I'm not sure that everyone's that happy with their lot here, Stacey. We will come back to that, but we're going to take a short break, and when we're back, we'll be talking more about with entrepreneur Stacey Boyd, specifically about how Nobel Prize winner Malala inspired her latest business, and more generally about whether it's a good thing when business takes over the role of government. Who do you think is better able to help the world, corporations or governments? I want to hear from you. Call me toll free on 877-974-7487. Tweet me on SXM Insight or share your thoughts on Facebook Live at facebook.com/Noreena Hertz. Yeah, can we speak?
I think that's
okay.
We can
speak. We have a break. Okay. But we're still on Facebook Live. Remember?
We're live. Okay. Great.
But actually, let's continue. We can continue that.
And again, it's been just an observation of.
Do you think people are happy with their lot here? I don't think so. I don't think so.
But do they think that there's
so. Maybe they're more polite? Like maybe they're.
I was thinking geographically.
London is different. I was going to say London feels different to me.
But that said, I think your analysis of how people get happy with their lot is absolutely correct. I mean, this is what de Tocqueville, when de Tocqueville went to America, that's his whole thesis about America.
That is.
He's got this chapter called "Why the Americans Are So Restless Amidst Their Prosperity." And that title says it all.
And I really,
everybody expects to be
it was amazing being in New York after having been here for a couple of months. There was truly. I mean, there was sort of a baldness in the way that everybody interacts with one another after having been here in London, which is so careful in its way. But there was also, and that's also part of where we are as a country right now, there's just a simmering. There's such an unhappiness, deep unhappiness with where we are and where we think we can go and whether the American dream is still alive. I think there's still a bitterness that it might not be as alive as it.
I think there's going to be a lot of people.
There's a theme of the danger of dreams.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a real theme
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, which we are definitely coming to.
Tyranny of perfection.
Beautifully crafted, so that we
end
up there.
Yeah.
Amazing job.
But like an intellectual shepherd.
But I think if you think about Brexit, and if we do actually leave, which odds still are that we will, there are going to be a lot of people who were sold a dream about what Brexit was going to deliver.
That is nothing closely remote to the truth of what they will end up swallowing.
To that extent, the politics is very similar, both. But
I'll tell you, the thing that I wish we had learned from Brexit was how deep the dissatisfaction was. I mean, that to me
for
was
the
the
American
lesson
election.
For the American election. If we had really listened.
Yeah, but I'm not sure if you could have done it in the short time.
I think we could have. I remember, so that to me is that I'm sad that the US did not learn that lesson earlier, because I think if they had.
Yeah, but Trump's a temporary problem. Brexit's a permanent problem.
I know.
Big difference.
I know.
Trump so far, other than this ridiculous tax package, hasn't done anything.
Keep hope Mueller does what he does best, and we'll end up with something.
Well, Brexit's not forever. I mean, who knows?
True.
These things can change.
It's a harder thing to turn around.
Well, as Europe gets reorganized, and I don't know, you know more. I mean, there are concentric circles and all that. And
it'll take a long time.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a circuitous route to get back to kind of roughly
where we were.
Where you should have been.
I loved Joe Biden, by the way. He's wonderful, and his son Beau is a good friend of mine.
Oh, was he?
Yeah.
Was that very sudden?
He was, in fact, he was a classmate of Scott's.
Oh, at Penn.
At Penn, yes.
Yeah.
Scott's your husband.
Scott's my husband. Yes.
So what does Scott do? Does he?
Scott's writing a book right now. He is indeed.
Let me look out for the book. What's his name?
Another writer.
Hamilton.
Right.
Another writer.
Perhaps you ought to talk to the two of you. He's got it.
Right.
Related to Alexander Hamilton, in fact.
On the real Hamilton, or
Is he?
Hamilton?
Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton. Yes.
Really?
Which have either any of you seen?
No.
I'm going.
Oh, is it worth seeing?
It is
amazing.
Beyond worth.
It's on in Victoria, right?
It is extraordinary.
We're back in 30 seconds.
Okay.
We might all want to. Yeah, I cannot wait to see it. Just in case there's a caller. Okay. Anyway, it makes you look very professional.
What is it?
You will love it.
I can't wait. Yes. Yeah, we are going. We're going in a couple of weeks, I think. Yeah.
To see Hamilton.
Yes. Yes. Very lucky. Okay. Okay. How many seconds? Okay. All right. So we're going to come back to you, Stacey.
Okay.
We're going to learn about what you are up to. It's very interesting. Why you've moved here. All the way from San Francisco.
From our circuitous route to the National Gallery.
That was funny. That's funny. It's funny asking all our...
And what was so funny is I went to look at art in both places, which I didn't realize until I was doing a little bit of research, was something that you
have
written about.
Yep. But not art and jogging.
No, not art and jogging.
So what did you go and see when you arrived at National?
Da Vinci to the National Gallery.
Have you noticed how the fact that the National Gallery is free is really great for just going in to see one picture?
Oh, we're back on. We're back on. So welcome back to the show that puts European spin on the big stories of the day. We just got so caught up with our chat that we missed our cue. But let's go straight back to Stacey Boyd, the American entrepreneur who's also on a social mission. Her new venture, Olivela, targets women, enabling them to shop for luxury brands, but at the same time do good. I went on the Olivela website. There's amazing things there. And, you could get, for example, this is going to mean a lot more to the women in the room, but you could get a Stella McCartney handbag, which is a big deal to the two guys.
Yeah,
if you're thinking about Christmas presents for your wives. So you could get the bag. But when you got the bag, it also gave 95 days of school for girls in places
close to a year's worth of school.
Who otherwise wouldn't be in school. Or you could buy a Marc Jacobs backpack, and that gave 19 days of music lessons for US schools. So this is very cool. What inspired you to start it?
It's Malala. I was with Malala Yousafzai and her father Zia in Dadaab, which is the world's largest refugee camp on the most western border of Kenya, bordering Somalia. And we were there for her 19th birthday. She, unlike most teenagers, does not celebrate her birthday by throwing birthday parties. Instead, she goes to spread and shed the light on girls in need. And as we got off the plane, a UN World Food plane, we met this young woman by the name of Rama. Rama was 15 years old. She had been repatriated to Somalia. Upon arriving in Somalia, her father had promised her to a man 35 years, her senior. Rather than accepting that fate, she took an 8-day bus and walking trip back to Dadaab, Kenya, where we met her to re-enroll in a program that Vodafone had put together for about 36 girls to help them get their post-secondary degree. And she thought that was her greatest chance at having a shot in this life. And as I reached into my bag to take a picture of Rama and Malala and these 36 girls, I realized that a fraction of the cost of the bag I was carrying could have sent a girl to school for a year. Mm. And I thought, what if we got the world's leading luxury brands, Prada and Stella McCartney and Valentino and others, to, like they do with Selfridges or Saks in the US, sell us that merchandise, but a large portion of the proceeds would go to fund a child like Rama. So that was the start of it, and that was about a year and a few months ago, and we launched about 3 months ago.
Who was the first luxury brand who you managed to sign
goodness. up? They're hard in that they travel in packs. So we had about 12 of them that signed on initially. We're up to 89 luxury brands as of today, and most of them are based here in Europe. So Milan, London, Paris, which is why I moved to London.
Do they make a contribution, or where does it come?
No, we do. So we're essentially a Selfridges with a soul, or Saks with a soul, right? So we sell the same products, same luxury brands that they would, but every purchase you make,
it comes out of your profit, if I can put it like that.
That's correct.
Rather than theirs.
You're still profit making.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We are a business, and I am a firm believer in the profit incentive. I have quite a lot invested in the company. And I believe that the more money we make, the more money we'll be able to give back, which allows us to make more, which allows us to give back more, which is a pretty powerful combination. If you look at a Saks that's making 5 or 6 billion a year, and you think about 20% of that going to a charitable cause, you can do something quite substantial with that.
Because I do believe that corporations can play a positive role, and I am very proud actually that I was involved with the start of Bono's Project Red,
yes,
which is not dissimilar
at all.
Example. Yeah, so which has now raised $500 million
yes.
To help HIV/AIDS in Africa, and touched, I think it's over 100 million lives. So, I definitely believe in this, and I'm proud to have been part of it. And it was actually something I wrote, which Bono read, which inspired him to start the whole thing. So, a book that I wrote, The Silent Takeover. But sometimes I do worry that isn't there a danger that if the private sector takes on these roles that traditionally, were government's roles, providing aid to Africa, education, music and schools, we're basically giving governments a free pass.
It's not an either or an or, and private industry is never going to replace the role that government does. But there are places where government is broken, right? When I started a sister brand to Schoola 4 or 5 years ago, 50% of California schools had lost all programming. 50% of every school, every public school in California lost art, music, and drama programming. I mean, that's a stunning number, right? So you could either stand there on the sidelines and say, next 2 to 3 years, we're going to get government to reinstate that funding. Or you can say, no, we're going to find a way to sell. And in this instance, we sold used clothing through Schoola. We sold up to 10,000 units a day. And we're going to help schools get art, music, and drama programs back in place. So it's not an either and or. That doesn't mean that it wasn't reinstated. Some of the programming was reinstated. There's a place for private sector to help out. And I think there are even larger places for the private sector to help out in countries that don't have a lot of government infrastructure to begin with.
Who do you think is better able to help the world, corporations or governments? I want to hear from you. Call me toll free on 877-974-7487, tweet me on SXM Insight, or share your thoughts on Facebook Live at facebook.com/Noreena Hertz. Alain, how do you feel about corporations like doing these philanthropic roles, but taking on these functions like arts education in schools?
Well, if you talk to many wealthy people, they're often not driven by wealth. They're driven by other things. They want to make a positive difference. They want to change the world for the better. So we've got this model of the evil capitalist. But I think at the moment we're only incentivizing capitalists by money. And I think a good development in the last, 15 years is that people are more and more becoming incentivized by the idea of giving. And it's no longer enough just to make a lot of money. You've got to give some of it away. You've got to be seen to be giving it away, and you've got to give it away intelligently. This is now seen, certainly in the West Coast, I think, as something that you do as a successful person. Accumulation is not enough. I'm hopeful too that in time we'll see that the way that you accumulate money matters a lot as well. Are you paying your taxes? That's a really good sign that you're accumulating it properly. Are you treating your workforce well? Are you treating the environment well? These should all be factors that are put into play when we decide who deserves status in our society. And ultimately, it's an emotional business, and people want to be respected. So we, the public, have an enormous power in who we give respect to and for what. And I think too often we've perhaps not, we've been given our respect too easily to people who maybe didn't pay their taxes, destroyed the environment, didn't pay people very well, and just gave a token little donation at the end.
Yeah, the power in our pockets to vote with our wallets. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I've been doing, as you in the room know, kind of quite a lot of research on what I call Generation K. So that's teenagers, and they really increasingly care about those issues, about the environment, about how things are made, about social justice, about equality. And so they will increasingly reward companies who are delivering on that front and penalise companies that don't. Nick?
The only thing I would say, first, it's wonderful to hear about your new venture, Stacey, and I hope it's successful. But not all the time, but governments can do something which most corporations and private sector enterprises can't, is they can operate at a vastly, vastly bigger scale. And I sometimes think, it's brilliant that, by the way, firstly, it's not either or, can either government. So it's about partnership. But sometimes I worry a little bit that a huge amount of energy can be invested in initiatives which are actually quite small. And some of these big problems require big, sustained. I'll give you an example. You said that thing Red.
Yes.
Brilliant. $500 million. If I think back to my time in government, and so Britain is a sort of middling sized economy, we would sit around and at every budget time decide how £700 billion was spent, and where you moved $500 million was, in that context, a very, very small thing. So in other words, governments can do really, really big things, particularly if they then work in harness with each other. And that's why Alain's point about paying your taxes is so important. I think it is just out of order when large, private sector corporations sort of go on about how they're great forces of good and just seem so reluctant to play by the common rules of the game when when it comes to tax, because that's the common pot where you can create vast scale to deal with some of these vast problems. And I think it is a good thing that's becoming increasingly unacceptable.
But when I've spent quite a lot of time with the tech titans of Silicon Valley, and their argument is, well, we don't believe in paying loads of taxes because we think that we, rather than government, we are better suited.
Well, they're so wrong, and I really think. Much though I think the genius of technology, and I'm usually a massive supporter and defender of Silicon Valley in kind of general terms. I think this kind of libertarian, hey, we came up with something in a garage, we don't like governments, all politicians are rubbish. It's infantile, and they are now major components of every aspect of our lives. They have to accept that they now have wider moral, ethical, and social responsibilities. They can't just exempt themselves from the way in which we collectively decide in a democracy to operate things. And I really think it's time they kind of, on that front, I think they're being unfairly criticised for other stuff. On this one, they're not.
I 100% agree with Nick. I think that there's a responsibility for corporations and individuals to pay taxes. I will say, however, that I think technology can provide solutions that we otherwise, as government, couldn't provide. So, for example, Google has this incredible thing called Project Loon, where they launch cell phone towers, and in a camp like Dadaab that I was in, they can provide...
These are things in balloons.
They're balloons. Yeah. They're balloons that they set over. They're able to control them via computer terminal of where they go. And you're able to beam down to populations that never, ever had any sort of connectivity, an extraordinary amount of connectivity, which can help with health, which can help with education, with a host of other things. Government can't do that alone. So to me, it's a partnership between the two.
Well, thank you, Stacey. And America. Here we are at this dinner party of a radio program with entrepreneur activist Stacey Boyd, ex-Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, and philosopher Alain de Botton, bringing you the latest thought and gossip from this side of the ocean. I want to change tack and kind of come to something that we started alluding to right at the start. We're coming to the end of the year, always a time of reflection. And looking back to 2017, it's pretty dark year. I mean, we've seen a rise of populism, we've seen a rise of nationalism, we've seen increase in anti-Semitism and racism, increase in terrorist attacks, a president of the United States who's increasingly unpredictable and dangerous. Alain, you're a philosopher, you have best-selling books in over 30 countries, you're also a parent. In these dark times, I'm really interested to get your take on this. How much should we shield our children? How much should we protect them from what's going on?
I think we should shield our children and shield ourselves as adults. I think that it's a particular neurosis of our age that we feel that we've got to know about everything that's going on in the world all the time, just when it's happening, when most of those things are absolutely outside of our power to change anything. And in fact, furthermore, they distract us from our capacity to change things that are closer to home. So what we end up doing is, looking at our Twitter feed while right next to us a child is crying and needs a bath or something. So I think that we help humanity best when we approach problems that we can solve. And frankly, it would be far better for you to go and talk to an elderly neighbor who's maybe feeling alone, is a little depressed, their child's away or something like that. Go and talk to them rather than sitting glued to the news about a disaster on the other side of the world. The disaster on the other side of the world will be taken care of by the people who live there. I think it's a mania of our time.
But so would you not even, I don't know, if there was an earthquake in Japan,
I would go so far as to say,
discuss that with
I would
your
go
children?
so far as to say,
no.
The only thing you need to know are the things that you can change around you. Now that could involve.
So would you really not
have
that conversation over dinner with your kids?
Yeah, maybe, but I think that we've gone so far the other way. We're so in danger of living our lives through the media sphere that I think that the best thing that you can give your child is a sense that, once the door shuts on the family, it's the family and its dramas and its sorrows and its joys that are going to be at the center of the table. Not the earthquake, because they'll get the earthquake anyway, whether they like it or not. It's going to come into consciousness.
Now, I want to hear from you on this too, and I think we've got a problem with the phone lines, so sorry you can't phone in, but if you're with us on Facebook Live or on social media, do tweet us or share your thoughts. In these anxiety-provoking times, do you let your kids watch the news, or do you do all you can to keep the big bad world as far away from them as possible? Stacey, do you patrol your kids' lives online? How do you, I guess in practical terms, how do you manage this?
We've taken a pretty hard line on social media in our family for the very reasons that Alain talks about. So my eldest daughter does have a cell phone, and she is allowed, her rule is that she is allowed to text friends that are overseas that she does not see every day, but otherwise we're not able to use Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or other methods of social media because it's well,
any intelligent, self-aware person from the West Coast takes that line. Indeed, many people who run tech companies are particularly strong on this because they know that we've created a very unstable drug that is more or less ruining our minds.
Just figuring out who they are at that age, never mind how to best put themselves forward on social media.
John on Facebook says the best advice, so he really agrees with us all, best advice, don't get the kids to watch the news. It's negative and dull. But Nick, you were Deputy Prime Minister. Could you realistically in that job shield your kids from the news, or would you even have wanted to?
If I could get my kids to take any interest in the news, I'd be delighted. They spend all their time caring about how Arsenal and Barcelona are doing in football. I mean, any interest in the wider world would be wonderful. I got the reverse of our dilemma. They're not slightly interested in anything which occurs beyond the end of their nose. So I'm very impressed that Alain's much more distinguished household. He's struggling with this insatiable appetite to know about distant and far off places. No, I have the reverse problem, but I
was the news. I mean, you were the news.
No,
in a way.
They're rebelling.
Yes, I do think there's. I mean, no doubt my children will tell me in 20 years' time that they were utterly traumatized by having their dad in in politics for a while, but if anything, I tried to, in the time that I was in the sort of furnace of frontline politics, I much tried to kind of shield my kids from all of that, just because I thought, it's bad enough to have a parent who's chosen to go into politics to then also have it kind of foisted upon you. So no, I've never. But just the interesting thing about the social media point, because I'm like so many millions of parents, two teenage. We've got three. Miriam and I've got 3 boys, 2 teenagers, and a young one. And like, there's bits of it which are just brilliant, because they can now play with their kids, even though they're not physically in the same place, in a way which actually enhances their social relationship with others. And yet it does appear to have a sort of kind of an addictive quality, which is kind of worrying. And I really, really struggle, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of lots of parents on both sides of the Atlantic, really struggle to get my kids to read. I mean, just a slow time, kind of nice, kind of languid habit of just reading.
A way that we all kind of nurtured our own imaginations and creativities from a really
It's all become
young
so
age.
abbreviated.
Yeah. Now, Alain, can we go back to the bleakness?
Yes.
So, I'm a bit of a glass half empty kind of person, as my husband would say. So the bleakness, this bleak world. Are you pessimistic about the future? Are you a pessimistic person?
Pessimism has got a very bad name. So if someone says, someone's pessimistic, etc., we always imagine that that's the prelude to a disaster, to something that's not as good as it should be. But I think strategically deployed, pessimism has got a lot to offer us in particular areas. If you're a bit of a pessimist in politics, for example, I think it's highly helpful. One of the great enemies of democratic politics at the moment is impatience. Nick knows that, when you're trying to change something worthwhile, it takes a long, long time. It's not going to change in 5 seconds. If you're a bit of a pessimist, it really means, you're able to say to people, we're doing our best, but, like any large human institution, it's going to be flawed. There will be compromises, blah, blah, blah. If people have got that, the back of their minds, you will have a mature electorate. And mature electorates are fantastic because they enable politicians to undertake large projects, to allow for certain errors along the way, and to not get in a rage when everything isn't perfect on day one. So one of the great problems is an over-optimistic population. And this seeps through down into personal life as well. I mean, we were talking about the royal wedding, etc. When people are incredibly impatient and incredibly over-optimistic around things like relationships or their careers or bringing up their children or whatever, you will get it starts off with rather sweet impatience, but at the end it turns into envy, rage, and anger.
Should we not retain hope?
We can retain hope, but I think that our societies ultimately betray our hopes in a particularly cruel way by raising them, hopes that everybody expects, everyone who's alive in the modern world expects that they're going to have a fantastic personal life and a fantastic blemish-free career. Actually, you will not get through this life without a major problem or set of problems in your career and in your personal life. It simply is not possible. Now, that should be written in large letters and hung off the side of Big Ben, because not in order to depress people,
Statue of Liberty.
not in order to depress people, but in order to provide, that famous word resilience, which we all now don't have enough of, because it's a symptom of this kind of over-optimism. So it's not nasty at all to tell your kids, you're probably not going to have, a blemish-free life. That's not a problem. But, you might at times be in total despair, but that's life. And,
And is that the sort of message you actually tell your kids?
You sound like a really cheerful dad.
It's about celebrating failure, right? Like, failure is a very natural part of life, and helping kids appreciate failure and its power to get you to a different place is incredibly
But I would
important.
say, I mean, only because Americans have got a particular take on failure, because Americans say that they embrace failure, but only as a prelude to greater success. So I want to defend failure.
Proper failure.
No, but what comes after failure? Love and compassion. Because if you've experienced failure and you've experienced the failure of others, that is a route to compassion. If you introduce me to somebody who's only ever succeeded, this person is by definition going to have no heart.
And they can't experience empathy. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's beautiful.
So in a way,
yes.
that's what it leads to. So
what's the phrase? Hope for the best. Expect
Expect the worst.
Expect the worst. Hope for the best. Hope for the best.
Hope for the best. Expect
Right.
the worst.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So don't look forward to Christmas. Do expect your family to drive you mad and resign yourself to another year of darkness and despair. You know what, Alain?
It's not that dark.
I'm not 100% convinced.
No.
I
don't want to go that far. But I would say something like,
I think I'd rather start the year on a more optimistic note in all seriousness, thank you all so much for coming on. Nick Clegg's new book, How to Stop Brexit, is the perfect read for anyone interested in understanding what on earth's going on with British politics. Check out Alain de Botton's vast body of work at your local bookstore or on Amazon. And if you're thinking about a luxury Christmas gift for a loved one, why not get one that can make a real difference and go to staceyboydsoliveayler.com. My thanks to all my guests here in London and to all of you who listened across the broad Atlantic and joined us on Facebook and Twitter. MegaHertz was presented by me, Noreena Hertz, and produced by Chris Cox. We'll be back with you for a New Year's special show on January the 1st. Until then, have a nice day, America, and happy holidays. See you on the other side.